Hey guys, tonight we begin in a place where even dust has ceremonial importance, and cleaning is not just a household chore, but an ancient ritual full of symbolism, patience, and feathers. Yes, real feathers. Not modern dusters, not chemical-soaked, rags but instruments made from the lightest, most spiritually appropriate wings in the realm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand before a small stone warehouse set into the west bank of the Nile. The sun is beginning to set, turning the river orange and rust as the heat of the day slowly dissolves into shadow. The warehouse's entrance is low, with a wooden bead curtain that sways gently in the evening breeze. You push the beads away with your hand and go inside. The smell is the first thing that hits you, a mix of dry straw, unlit incense, and something slightly sweet, perhaps wildflowers mixed with ancient dust. The light is dim. A few oil lamps illuminate shelves filled with papyrus boxes, wicker baskets, and feathers. Feathers of all sizes, colors, and types. Goose feathers stacked with precision, ibis feathers wrapped in linen, and, most intriguing, ostrich feathers, separated by tags, each marked with symbols you don't recognize. They look like notes, almost like prayers. A man approaches with short strides, wearing a worn cotton tunic tied with a cord woven with ceramic beads. He is old, the kind who looks as if he has seen the original dust of Egypt form, but his eyes shine. Not with weariness, but with reverence. He doesn't say his name, he just points to the feathers. "You want to know how we clean the desert," he says, his voice almost a whisper, as if the sand is listening. You hesitate. He smiles. "It starts here." With respect, you follow him as he walks to a low table. He takes from a box a long black feather, carefully curved at the tip. He blows lightly on it, and a cloud of fine dust rises, as if even the air here is filled with memory. This one came from the Temple of Hathor. It was used for 23 years before being retired. You ask if it's just a cleaning tool. He laughs. Not loudly. A dry laugh, like the sound of straw bending. Cleaning is only part of it. It pushes away. It calms. It orders. He shows you a small ritual. A square of stone is covered in sand, like a miniature altar. With slow movements, he runs his feather along the corners, causing the grains to rearrange themselves like soldiers responding to an invisible order. You watch, mesmerized. The way he holds the quill, the care with which he avoids touching it, with his dirty fingers, as if the quill had a will of its own, as if it needed to be convinced to cooperate. Historically, the Egyptians had a peculiar obsession with order, the ma'at, a principle of balance, justice, and harmony. That was why temples were constantly cleaned, straight lines reaffirmed, corridors swept with feathers and not brooms. Because removing dust was not about erasing the trace of time. It was about reaffirming the place of things. What about the feathers? They came from sacred birds. They were not collected at random. There was a ritual for this too. A priest would wash his hands with milk and honey, pronounce an incantation, and only then would he collect the feather, usually from an animal that had already died naturally, as if even death had to wait for the right moment. You look at the baskets around the room. How many stories were there tied in the fibers of the feathers? How many gods were summoned with a light touch on a dusty altar? Historians still argue, the old man says, as if reading his mind, whether this method really cleaned more than water. But that's not what it's about. Is it about the gesture? It's about the gesture, he confirms. He hands you a smaller feather, blue-gray. Try it. You bend down, sweeping a trace of dust off one of the shelves. It's gentle, useless almost. The dust barely moves, but something in you calms, as if your mind is being dusted too. Now you understand, he says, and you understand because cleaning with feathers may be useless from a practical point of view. But from the spirit's point of view, maybe it's exactly what the soul needs. You start your day by walking down a polished stone corridor that reflects the heat like a pot left on the stove. The walls are inscribed with hieroglyphics that you don't understand, but you pretend you do, just to feel more at home. The air smells like a mix of aged papyrus, fine sand, and something that resembles the perfume of resin. Beside you, a temple employee, with a tightly tied turban and the patience of a scribe, explains that today you will observe the cleaning of the priest's reception hall. You imagine something simple, maybe a damp cloth, a mop, a small bucket of fig vinegar. But no, what enters with all the solemnity of a sacred ritual are two men holding feathers. Yes, feathers. Long, white, soft, attached to thin polished wooden handles. They walk with the care of someone carrying offerings and begin to sweep the air with slow circular movements. As if the temple was allergic to haste, the dust surprisingly obeys. It doesn't disappear, that would be magic, but moves gracefully, forming gentle swirls that float to the corners, where they will later be collected with small ceramic shovels. You ask quietly, "Does this really work?" The scribe smiles. It works because it's beautiful. Historically, the Egyptians placed great importance on the balance between utility and aesthetics. It was not enough to simply clean, it was necessary to clean with dignity, with symbols, with gestures that spoke to the gods. And according to some local traditions, the feathers used to drive away dust were blessed in ceremonies linked to the goddess Ma'at, the personification of order and balance. You watch the movements carefully. It's like watching a silent ballet, where each feather dances with the desert wind. And then an unexpected curiosity. In some archaeological records, there are mentions of feathers dyed with natural extracts, light pink, soft blue, even gold. The dust was removed, yes, but with style. You sit on a rock and close your eyes for a moment, not out of tiredness, but to feel the sound of feathers moving in the air, as if time were being gently dusted off. Historians still debate whether this practice was common in all temples or only in more ceremonial settings. Some say that some wore ordinary rags, especially outside the capital, but among the most devout priests, feathers were almost sacred, and in the end, you understand, it wasn't just about sweeping the dust. It was about keeping the desert out and the order in here. You wake up the next day to golden sunlight streaming through the cracks in the linen awning. The air is still cool, at least cool by Egyptian standards, which means just a little hotter than a cheerful baker's oven. You stretch, put on your woven fiber sandals, and follow the sound of low voices coming from the inner courtyard of the complex. And there it is, a new demonstration of the power of the pen. This time, the cleaning staff are taking care of the statues. Yes, they also collect dust, and yes, there is a specific protocol for this. You watch as a man in a clay-colored robe and a teal sash around his shoulders approaches the statue of Horus with the reverence of someone preparing to speak to a superior. He holds a blue feather, probably from a heron, and begins to carefully sweep the base of the sculpture, moving from the feet to the top of the head in slow, almost ceremonial strokes. You notice him mumbling something with each step. You approach, slowly, curious. He is reciting the words of cleansing, says a voice behind you. You turn around and see a woman with a firm posture, carrying a small basket with clay pots. Cleansing words. Yes, it's a way to ward off bad luck. Dust on the god is a sign of disorder in the world. The idea that dust could shake the cosmos seems far-fetched, but at the same time, you look at the statue, and you get it. It really does look more peaceful after being cleaned. Historically, statues of the gods were treated as temporary incarnations of the divine itself. They were not just representations, they were dwellings, and like all noble dwellings, they needed to be impeccable. Priests would cleanse the images with feathers, aromatic oils, and even goat's milk mixed with myrrh. Interestingly, there is evidence of one feather in particular, taken from a rare species of Ibis from Upper Egypt, that was used exclusively to rub the faces of statues. A bird that, according to some, only flew when there was a balance between the Nile and the sky. This, of course, may have been an exaggeration on the part of the poetic scribes. But still, it sounds pretty, doesn't it? You watch as the ritual continues. The feather draws invisible paths in the air. The dust falls away like guilt forgiven. And you think, maybe the Egyptians knew something we've forgotten. That cleaning isn't just about removing dirt. It's about reorganizing the universe. Historians still debate whether all this care was widely practiced or was the preserve of the wealthiest temples. Some suggest that the practice was kept alive mainly by tradition, like when you place flowers on an altar without much thought, but feeling it was right. You walk away silently, letting the sound of feathers, prayers, and the soft clink of ceramic pots float through the warm air. And for the first time, you start to think that yes, maybe there are ways to clean that are also a way to pray. You leave the courtyard and walk down the stone corridor that leads to the back of the temple, where the less formal priests make their preparations. The ground is still slightly damp from the morning watering, and the scent is a mixture of fresh papyrus and resin. Everything pulses with a quiet rhythm, as if the temple itself breathes. There you come across an unexpected scene. 3 young apprentices, all with freshly shaved heads and the posture of someone who hasn't yet figured out whether to be nervous or proud, kneel before a pile of feathers arranged with mathematical precision on a mat. An older priest, his expression as calm as a sphinx at dusk, watches with his arms crossed. Today's lesson is balance, he says. You lean against a column, curious, and watch. Each apprentice takes a long feather and tries to pass a test, balancing it on the palm of their hand, then on the tip of a finger, and finally on the back of their hand, all while walking in a straight line down a narrow corridor. The mission seems simple, but it is not. If there is no balance in the pen, there is no balance in the temple, says the priest. You blink. It's a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it? But at the same time, there is something fascinating about this living metaphor. The lightness of the feather demands concentration, control, patience, and most of all, a complete presence in the moment. Historically, it is known that the Egyptians valued the concept of mate, order, truth, harmony, and the feather, of course, was the perfect symbol for this. In fact, in the famous scene of the Judgment of Souls, the heart of the deceased was placed on a scale and compared to the feather of Mut. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the spirit was pure. If it was heavier, well, let's just say the consequences involved a monster with the head of a crocodile. You watch as one of the apprentices drops his quill. Too much thought, too little hand, the master mutters, shaking his head. Another manages to cross the entire corridor without letting his pen slip. His eyes shine, not with vanity, but with relief. You approach the priest. Is this part of the cleaner's training? Part of everyone's training. Cleaning with a feather requires more than technique. It requires soul. Historians still debate the extent to which these practices were adopted by all temples, or whether they were exclusive to more esoteric orders. But there are detailed records of exercises in precision, focus, and lightness, all linked to the handling of sacred objects. You feel a certain silent respect for the young men kneeling, now rearranging the feathers with the delicacy of someone putting together an invisible puzzle. And that's when something unexpected happens. A light wind blows through the hallway, enough to lift 2 feathers off the mat and make them spin slowly. In the air, dancing like slowly falling golden leaves, the apprentices freeze, the master smiles. The wind also teaches, he says, and not always with words. You smile back, feeling like this seemingly trivial morning has just told you something important, even if you don't know exactly what it is yet. You walk out of the main temple and follow a narrow path that leads to the workers' quarters, a less ornate area with mud brick walls and makeshift clotheslines between wooden posts. The air here is hotter, heavier, and the smell of sweat and fermented dates hangs like an invisible curtain. There, amidst hushed conversations and the occasional sound of a pitcher being filled, you find the cleaners, not the apprentices in training, but the seasoned practitioners, the masters of feather cleaning. They sit in a circle preparing their instruments, feathers from herons, ibises, and occasionally ostrich, each with a specific function. Some are used to sweep the floor of the altar, others to remove dust from divine statues, and still others to touch the bodies of priests in purification rituals. One of them, A man bent by time with eyes clearer than the desert sky beckons you with a gesture. Sit down if you want to understand. You obey, crossing your legs on the dirt floor. He holds a long white feather between his thin fingers. This one, he says, lifting it, is more valuable than gold, because it cleans what gold leaves dirty. You laugh inside but say nothing, he continues. The problem with dust is that it's not just dust, it's memory. It's the past that insists on staying. That's why we use feathers, because they don't harm. They convince the dust to go away. You watch as he runs his pen over a piece of dark stone. The surface changes subtly, as if it were being touched by wind, not man. Another cleaner, a woman with strong arms and a calm expression, shows a trick. She twirls the feather in the air before she starts cleaning, as if she were waking up the object. The feather needs to know what it is going to touch, she explains. There is a reverence there that is surprising. It is not just cleanliness, it is communication. Historically, the Egyptians had highly symbolic cleansing rituals. In many temples, sacred objects were washed, anointed, aired, and yes, stroked with feathers as part of a daily process of spiritual renewal. The use of feathers was not aesthetic, it was functional and philosophical. After all, a temple could not house deities if it was permeated with neglect. You remember something you heard earlier. The pen removes what the eye does not see. Why not use cloths, you ask? A third cleaner responds, as he sharpens the handle of a feather with a stone. Cloths judge, feathers only suggest. That sentence sticks to you like fine dust. The cleaners continue to demonstrate movements, circular, horizontal, spiral. Each surface requires a rhythm, an approach. A statue of Anubis, for example, cannot be cleaned in the same way as an offering jar. It is a dance, and the feathers are the steps. You try to imitate. You pick up a feather and approach a small amphora covered in golden powder. His first movement is clumsy. He's trying to push the past, says the older one. Invite him to leave. You try again. Lighter, slower, and it works. The dust slides away as if it had accepted a polite invitation to leave. Historians still debate the extent to which this symbolic approach was followed by everyone, or whether it was restricted to the wealthiest and most dedicated temples. But there are paintings and texts that describe feathers being passed with almost ceremonial care over cult objects. You realize there is something deeper in this gesture. It is as if cleaning with feathers is a way of reminding us that even gods need care, that even the sacred accumulates traces of time, and that maybe, just maybe, we do too. Ultimately, the circle of cleaners breaks up. Some go to the dormitories. Others go to the riverbanks where they undress and dive in silence. You stand up slowly, still with the pen in your hand. It is light, but now it seems to contain much more than air and keratin. She carries a way of seeing the world. You walk along the banks of the Nile River at dusk, with the feather still in your hands, as if you were carrying a talisman without knowing exactly what it is for. The sun slowly sinks below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of copper and rust. In front of you, the river reflects everything with that lazy calm that only great rivers have. Everything seems silent, but it is that silence that listens, observes, breathes. Nearby, some cleaners are sitting on rounded rocks, with their feet in the water and their gaze lost in the constant flow. One of them raises a feather over the river, and without touching it begins to make movements in the air, as if sweeping the waves. Another accompanies the gesture with a low chant, almost a rhythmic whisper. You come closer. Are they cleaning the water? He asks, trying to sound curious and not skeptical. One of the men, young and with a sunburned face, responds with a smile. Water cleanses the body, but water also tires. The dust of the desert is not only in the sand, it is in ideas, in shoulders, in words. Sometimes we clean the river just so it can remember what lightness is. You stand there watching the strange ballet of feathers on the current. The movements do not touch the water but interact with it, as if the feather gives direction and the water obeys out of respect. An older janitor begins to explain what sounds like a poem. A feather cleans the altar. A feather cleans the bread. Feather cleanses the soul and cleans even loneliness. You smile. It's beautiful, it's kind of absurd, and at the same time it makes perfect sense, like everything Egypt invented. Historically, there are symbolic records that link the feather to the judgment of souls. In the Book of the Dead, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul went on to a peaceful eternity. If it was heavier, well, let's just say there was no second chance. And it is this feather of Ma'at that you think of now as one of the cleaners holds up a similar one, stylized in gold, small but respectable, and dips it delicately into the river's edge. Sometimes, he says, we wipe with the feather of Ma'at to remember that the truth also needs to be swept away from time to time. To avoid accumulating pride. You nod, half hypnotized by the tone of the words. The sky slowly darkens. The cleaners rise one by one, storing their feathers in leather cases. You follow them to a small hut nearby, where they hang the feathers like resting swords, side by side. Each one has a name. Literally, you read the inscriptions with curiosity. Whisper, Old Sand, Shadow of Ra. Do you name your feathers? The oldest smiles with the corner of his mouth. Of course. You have a name too, don't you? You take a step back respectfully. You realize that for them, these tools are not utensils. They are companions, extensions of a gesture, of a faith, of a routine that goes beyond the body. Historians still debate whether these names given to feathers were common among cleaners or an isolated, perhaps regional practice. There are few direct records, but many clues in hieroglyphics and paintings of stylized feathers, accompanied by personality symbols, eyes, lightning bolts, moons, even scarabs. Back at the temple, you watch the apprentices line up to put away their instruments. One by one, each feather is cleaned, wrapped in a fine cloth and placed in a plain, light-colored wooden box. You hand over yours too, the feather that has been with you all day, and as you watch it disappear into the box, you feel a strange pang in your chest, as if you were leaving something very intimate behind. Will you miss it? Asks one of the apprentices, laughing. I think so, you answer, but it's not from the pain. It's from the feeling of ritual, from the patience that each gesture required, from the intentional lightness. You look at your hands. They are clean, but not the kind of clean that comes with water. They are clean from haste, from distraction, from hardness, and for a brief moment, you understand what the Egyptians meant by the idea that cleaning is also a type of prayer. You take a deep breath, and the air feels thinner, purer, maybe for the first time all day. You wake up to the distant sound of someone sweeping stone with stone, not wood, not straw, but two smooth pebbles gently rubbing together. This is how the day begins around here, with noises that sound more like rituals than practical actions. The sun hasn't even fully risen yet, but the temple already pulsates with movement. Men and women walk silently through the stone corridors, each carrying something small, a vial, a bowl, a feather. You stand up slowly. The floor is cold. The air is scented with incense and ancient dust. Someone hands you a small herbed flatbread, and you realize that here, even breakfast tastes like ceremony. Soon after, you enter a room you've never seen before, a round room with walls covered in symbols and a concave ceiling like the inside of a vase. In the center is a huge basin made of carved alabaster. Beside it, 3 women dip feathers one by one in scented oils and let them dry on a hot stone. Today is anointing day, says a soft voice behind you. He is the chief scribe, a thin man with hands that seem made for touching the wind. He holds a rolled parchment with a wax seal that gleams in the early morning light. The feathers need to be at peace to touch the body. You frown, trying to understand. Body? He smiles. Not all feathers cleanse dust. Some cleanse mourning. Others cleanse fear. Today we're going to the hospital, and that's how you find yourself riding a small cart, flanked by 2 initiates and a basket with feathers soaked in myrrh, slowly heading towards a white building on the other side of the city. The Egyptian hospital, or Perank as it is called, is more than a place of healing. It is also a sanctuary. A space where illness is treated not only with ointments and bandages, but with silence, gestures, and smells. There, the sick do not scream. They sleep. Curators don't run, they whisper. What about the feathers? The feathers dance. In each ward, a cleaner walks slowly alongside the stretchers. He holds a long feather, dyed blue and green, and makes circular movements in the air above the patient, not touching, just suggesting, as if to say, "Get up, go away, you are not welcome here." This practice, explains the scribe, is as old as the gods. The feathers carry away the bad vapors, they help to realign the soul, and when the soul is light, the body remembers how to rest. You watch, fascinated. A feverish man smiles through his delirium as the feather passes over his forehead. A child falls deeper asleep as he feels the silent breeze of a touch that does not touch. And you understand. Understand that here, a feather is not a tool. It is a bridge. Historically, there are scattered descriptions of such practices in Egyptian medical texts, especially in the Ibis and Edwin Smith papyri. Although many modern scholars interpret feathers as ceremonial or metaphorical tools, there is evidence that they were indeed used in purification rituals, both physical and spiritual. The academic debate persists. Is this medicine or theater? But anyone who has seen a child sleep peacefully to the sound of a feather sweeping through the air doesn't need a theory. Just remember the scene. You spend the morning there, watching. At some point, they give you a feather too. Not blue, not green, white. "For beginners," whispers the woman who hands it to you. You walk over to an old man's bedside. He is still, but his eyes are open, staring at the ceiling. You stop beside him, pick up the feather, and move it slowly. He blinks. You continue, and in the second movement his eyes close. Not out of pain, not out of fear, but for rest. You walk away, your heart light, and for the first time you feel, deeply, that you have cleared something, even without touching anything. You come back from the hospital with your head fuller than baskets of feathers soaked in myrrh. Along the way, the ox carts pass slowly, leaving trails in the fine dust that covers everything here. The streets, the feet of the statues, even the tips of your fingers. And for a moment, it seems as if Egypt itself is made of thin layers, of ancient dust which are never swept away, only relocated. Back at the temple, you are led to a new, more private courtyard, where initiates practice gestures. That's right, gestures. A row of apprentices practice what appears to be an extremely slow dance with feathers in their hands, sometimes raising their arms, sometimes bending their wrists at delicate angles, always keeping their wrists flexible, as if they were talking. To the air, the scribe, now in another robe, approaches. This is the courtyard of the choreographies of silence. You think the name is exaggerated. You might think that's an exaggeration, he says, smiling. But think about it. If the gods communicate in silence, why would we shout at the dust? You nod, half convinced, half still trying to understand. Dust is what remains of time, he continues, and time responds best to those who speak. Slowly, you are called to participate. 2 feathers are placed in your hands, one white and one black. They say the white one purifies, the black one absorbs. Move one while the other watches, instructs the master of gestures, a man with a voice lower than the sound of a candle breathing. You try to imitate what others do. It's harder than it seems. It's not about copying movements, but doing them with intention. Each gesture has a meaning, moving away, inviting, listening, asking for forgiveness, thanking. And then, without meaning to, you discover that a poorly moved pen can seem like sarcasm. The master approaches. Don't mock the wind, he says, and walks away. You try again and again and again, until finally a feather hangs in the air in a way that is not pretty, but is respectful. Now, yes, says the scribe somewhere behind you, the days go by like this, with dust rituals and arm dancing, with oil baths and symbolic sweeps. Even the instruments are peculiar. Brushes made from woven palm leaves, fans with ibis feathers, bronze sticks with tips that emit high-pitched sounds when rotated. They are said to scare away evil spirits that lurk in dusty corners. Historically, the Egyptians had an almost sacred relationship with cleanliness, both physical and spiritual. Their rituals were not just about purifying the body, but also the space. A dirty temple was an invitation to chaos, and in Egypt, chaos was not a metaphor, it was an entity. Scholars still debate the symbolic role of ceremonial cleansing instruments. Some say it was all theatricality. Others say there was an empirical, intuitive understanding of the relationship between environment and state of mind. You begin to notice this when you notice how the initiates themselves change throughout the day. In the morning, everyone is tense, sweating, focused on the movements. But after the third sequence of gestures, the touches of a feather on the hot stone, the sweeping of a staircase that no one has climbed for weeks, something changes. The back straightens, the shoulders relax, the breathing slows down. "It's sore," whispers the scribe beside him. "Dust makes us dirty, but it also shapes us." In the afternoon, you are invited to accompany a group to the top of the temple where the wind blows strongest. There they perform what they call a clearing of the vision. This is a ritual in which the eyes are lightly brushed with feathers, dipped in water infused with jasmine and fragments of myrrh, not to cure, but to prepare. "The world is not seen only with sight," explains the priestess. "Sometimes seeing is just a more elegant way of listening. You sit down, allow the feathers to brush lightly over your eyelids, and for a moment, everything seems to make sense. The wind, the silence, the pain. You remember the hospital, the sleeping child, the old man who blinked. And for the first time, you understand why the Egyptians trusted feathers so much. They don't just clean what you see, they clean what we no longer realize we are carrying." The sun is already preparing to set behind the temple columns when you are called to accompany a new type of sweep. This time, there are no feathers, no music, no words. It is a ceremonial cleansing done with silence. You follow the priests to an underground room, lit only by oil lamps where the air seems denser. The walls are covered in faded, almost erased inscriptions, and the floor is littered with tiny particles of sand, as if the desert were slowly trying to invade the temple, grain by grain. There, the ritual is conducted barefoot. Each step kicks up a small golden cloud, and this dancing dust mixes with the flickering light of the flames, creating a hypnotic effect. One of the monks holds a basket of tiny bones, yes, bones, that he says have been polished over decades until they are as smooth as glass. They are placed on the floor in a circular pattern in the center of the room. One by one, you get closer. They don't form a recognizable figure, but you feel that there is order to it, a kind of order that perhaps you can't see with your eyes, only with your whole body. Each bone represents an ancient memory, the monk explains in a low voice. What we have forgotten also needs to be cleansed. You stand with the others. Everyone is silent, and then begins what they call the path of oblivion. You walk slowly among the bones, following an invisible path, trying not to step on other people's memories. The sand slips away from under your feet. The sounds are minimal, breathing, distant crackling, a faint hum that might come from the wind outside, and it is in this space of almost nothing that something happens. You don't think about anything. Else? Not Egypt, not the heat, not the feathers, not even the question that brought you here. You just walk. Historically, the Egyptians had cleansing practices that were not only linked to the physical, but to what we would now call the psychological. Although the term did not exist, there were rituals to calm the spirit, purge harmful thoughts, and even sweep bad memories from a house or a person. Some papyri mention ceremonies performed during specific lunar phases in which symbols were drawn on the ground and then swept away with date palm branches as a way of erasing the trace of error. Scholars still debate whether such rituals had symbolic efficacy or a placebo effect. But you now understand that it's not always about erasing. Sometimes it's just about stirring the sand. After the path of bones, you are taken to another chamber where there is a lit brazier. A woman in a teal robe places small feathers into the ember. "This is the last step of the day," she says. The release, the smell that wafts out is not that of ordinary smoke. It is sweet, with hints of spice and some herb that you cannot identify. The smoke rises in gentle spirals, and the initiates follow it with their eyes as if they were unspoken prayers. You join them and watch. Feathers dissolving into smoke, sand that doesn't make noise, memories that don't scream. Sometimes, says the scribe appearing at his side, you don't need to understand everything. You just need to sweep well. You take a deep breath. And for the first time since you arrived, you feel like the dust isn't trying to invade you. She is somehow welcoming you. You wake up to the sound of wings, not the chaotic fluttering of birds in flight, but a rhythmic cooing, almost like a song that only silence hears. The first light of day timidly enters through the cracks in the wall, creating golden stripes on the light stone floor. Outside, the temple is already in motion, and today is the day of the great cleansing, not just a sweep, but an event, a celebration of dust and renewal. You step out into the central courtyard, and the heat is still mild, the kind of heat that tricks you into thinking it will be bearable, even though you know that midday will melt the sand beneath your feet. In the center of the courtyard, a group of priests and servants are preparing the instruments of the ceremony. Reed brooms, cloth dyed with saffron dye, soapstone jars, and feathers. Lots of feathers. This time, they are not just white or gray. Feathers, they are colorful, deep blue, burnt red, rust amber, dull gold. An arch of feathers that on its own already looks like an offering. The scribe approaches you, wearing a robe embroidered with spiral lines, as if his clothing imitates the wind he observes so closely. Each color represents a direction, he says without you asking. And today all directions meet. You watch the preparations. Servants moisten the floor with mint and myrrh infusions to help the dust settle more easily. Children balance pots on their heads and hand out cloths to the elders. The initiates kneel around the central altar, where the first ceremonial frightening will be performed, a gesture in which everyone simultaneously waves their feathers toward the sky. You are led to your seat. A novice hands you a long, slightly curved teal feather. Today you sweep the north, he says, as if that explains everything, and maybe it explains. The sound of soft drums marks the beginning. It's not dance music. It's music of blowing and stepping, as if each beat says, now, now, now. The arms move in sync. The feathers trace arcs in the air, like invisible paintbrushes. The dust from the yard doesn't rise up. It dissolves. You feel it on your face. The sand seems lighter, less invasive, as if it understood that today is the day to leave. Historically, it is known that the Egyptians performed collective purification rituals, especially before important dates such as lunar celebrations, seasonal transitions, or festivities linked to the harvest. It was a way of preparing the ground, not just in the literal sense, but in the symbolic sense, clearing the space to receive something new, be it food, a soul, or a decision. Some records found in tombs speak of sweeping, dances, in which feathers were used to ward off sick spirits or heavy memories. Instead of expelling them violently, they were cleaned gently, almost as if to say, please leave. You're doing well, the scribe says, walking up behind you, but your arm still thinks like a Westerner. You laugh, he laughs too. After the central ritual, everyone disperses into smaller groups. Each person takes charge of a corner of the temple. You are led to the papyrus garden, where the dust mixes with the sweet scent of the Nile flowers. There the cleaning is done in silence. Only the feathers move, and for some reason that makes more sense now than any word spoken before. You bend down past the feather between two stones, and there you find something. A small beetle, made of stone, polished, abandoned. You hold it up. The surface is smooth but marked. There is a symbol at the bottom, a stylized eye, amulet of rebirth, whispers a woman behind you, wearing a white linen veil. Those who clean with truth always find what was forgotten. You keep the beetle, not out of superstition, but because at that moment he seems like the only solid thing in that sea of dust that, little by little, is losing its power to confuse. The sun is already high, and the color of the day now is amber. You take a deep breath and keep cleaning. The papyrus garden begins to empty. The sound of feathers quiets, replaced by small footsteps in the sand and whispers among the servants. Some carry pots of water to water the roots. Others just sit in silence, resting their shoulders after so many hours scaring away the invisible. You sit there a little longer in the shade of a date palm tree, staring at the stone scarab in your palm. The amulet's shine contrasts with the dust around it. Despite being a simple object, it carries a certain weight, not physical but symbolic, as if someone had left it there on purpose, as if someone wanted you to find it. A young apprentice approaches, carrying a basket of small clay pots. Each pot contains something different: myrrh ash, lotus oil, dark sand brought from far away. He offers you one of them with a discreet smile. For the eyes, he explains. When the dust is more tiring than the wind, you rub some of the oil around your eyes. The scent is fresh, almost sweet. Immediately you feel the muscles in your face relax. The apprentice walks away silently, as if his job there was simply to remind you to take care of yourself. That's when someone calls you. Come. The scribe has requested your presence in the lower hall. You walk down a narrow hallway, where low torches illuminate walls painted with scenes from Egyptian life. Men fishing, women weaving, children playing with cats. It's all very peaceful, but with almost hypnotic details. One of the men, for example, holds a branch of feathers as if it were a scepter, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice if you weren't living that exact scene. At the end of the corridor, you enter a large hall. There are stone benches arranged in a circle, and in the center, a large bronze basin filled with dark water. The scribe is there. He waves at you and points to the basin. Here we purify the instruments, he says. The feathers, the cloths, even the thoughts sometimes. You come closer and see. There are feathers submerged, floating slowly as if they were in a liquid dream. A servant gently picks them up one by one and places them on clean cloths, where they will dry in the sun later. Some feathers come back into use, explains the scribe. Others do not. You sit down next to him. The scent of the water is mild, but with an earthy undertone. The light from the torches dances across the surface of the liquid, creating shadows that move like sleeping serpents. There are records, he continues, of feathers that belong to specific priests. Feathers that were never used by anyone else. They are said to have absorbed something of the spirit of the person who used them, a kind of connection. You think of your own teal feather, now dry on your belt. Will it absorb something from you too? Historians still debate whether this idea of memory of objects had a ritualistic or symbolic basis. Some believe that feathers were treated as personal relics. Others believe that it was all just a ceremony to maintain order in a temple where everything had to have a place, even specks of dust. You found something in the garden, the scribe says suddenly, without looking at you. A beetle. You freeze for a moment. Yes, keep it. It didn't belong to the temple, but it belongs to you now. You want to ask what this means. But the scribe gets up first and disappears down the corridor, taking with him a roll of papyrus and a brush. It's just you, and the basin, and the feathers. You watch for a moment longer, then stand up, pick up your blue feather, and fasten it more firmly to your belt, as if it were suddenly more than a cleaning tool, as if it were a key to something still undefined. Outside, the sun is already starting to set, and the color of the day turns dark amber, the kind of light that makes cats look bronze and shadows longer than the bodies they cast. You walk back to the courtyard. The temple is silent, but not an empty silence. It is the silence of something clean, something soon. You take a deep breath and smile. You wake early to the soft sound of straw brooms gliding over stone and the distant cooing of pigeons perched beneath the temple roofs. The sun has not yet fully risen. It is only pouring a pale gold over the horizon, like a cup of honey slowly turning. You dress slowly, adjusting your linen tunic and tucking the teal feather into your belt, almost out of habit now. As you pass the papyrus garden, you smell still water and new leaves. No breeze, no insects, just the damp silence of an Egyptian morning. Today you have been called upon for something unusual, a ritual cleansing. In a tomb, but not just any tomb. It is an ancient priest's chamber, one of the innermost and sealed for decades. A group of initiates found fresh sand marks at the entrance, as if the wind had found a forgotten crevice. The scribe, of course, took this as a sign, and when Egyptians see signs, they clean them. You arrive at the entrance to the underground corridor accompanied by 2 guards and a young apprentice carrying a basket with cloths, oil, incense, and, of course, feathers. She offers you a longer, firmer one. It looks new, but you refuse. You lightly touch your own pen, which already bears small stains from the history of the last few days. You light oil lamps and descend a narrow staircase. The smell changes immediately. Old dust, limestone, and something sweet, perhaps dried myrrh resin. The walls are decorated with hieroglyphics, but most of them have faded. Only the relief remains, a low-relief reminder of what was. The group stops in front of a half-open stone door. The apprentice places the basket on the ground. You kneel, open the cloth and select a small bottle of scented oil. You moisten the tip of the feather and begin to gently dab it around the edges of the entrance. The sound is soft, almost musical, as if the stone was being gently awakened. Inside, the tomb is narrow with a low ceiling and still partially vivid paintings, scenes of the deceased priest being guided by Ibis, receiving bread from a servant, resting peacefully beneath a date palm tree. But it is all covered by a thin layer of sand that glistens in the lamplight, as if each grain has chosen a precise place to lie. You work calmly. With each stroke of your pen, you reveal forgotten details, the rim of a jar, the outlined eye of a figure, a nearly erased line of text that says something about silence and eternity. The apprentice silently offers you clean, damp cloths. But you prefer to keep the pen, because the dust there is not just dirt, it is accumulated memory. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians viewed cleaning as a religious or practical act. There are accounts of priests cleaning tombs with such reverence that they seemed more like mourning poets than temple workers. Others believe it was all part of a liturgy of maintenance, keeping the dead quiet so the living wouldn't have nightmares. You step back a little and observe what has already been revealed. It seems that the tomb has awakened from a long sleep. The apprentice lights an incense stick, and the scent fills the room. The smoke moves like ink in water, dancing among the feathers that now rest beside her. Then she whispers, "Did you see? Utidum." Frown. What? She points to a corner of the wall. A small, barely discernible drawing, a hand holding a quill. But not a writing quill. It's longer, more curved, more like her own. You exchange glances. Is it a coincidence? Or did the ancients also believe in the power of a pen, not only to write, but to reveal? You run your hand slowly over the drawing. The stone is cold, but something inside you warms. A silent confirmation. A bridge between now and then. The cleaning is done, the tomb in peace. You carefully wrap your feather in a linen cloth and silently thank the stone. As we climb, daylight already enters the corridor, illuminating the grains of sand suspended in. The air as if the temple were full of invisible fireflies. Outside, the world goes on, but you're different. Because sometimes history is not in monuments or scrolls. Sometimes it's in the dust that someone has taken the time to brush away with a feather. You return to the temple's outer courtyard with slow steps, as if each stone beneath your feet still tells you a secret. The heat of the day is stronger now, but not oppressive. It settles on your shoulders like an ancient cloak, heavy but familiar. Around you, acolytes sweep the passages with woven leaf brooms, and the older priests walk between the columns as if they are crossing dimensions, not corridors. You approach the central fountain. Water trickles in thin streams down an ibis sculpture, carved so delicately that it seems alive. You bend down, wash your hands carefully, and with your fingers, still damp, touch the feather, as if it too needs to be purified. Today, your destination is the room of the instruments of worship, a reserved place where not only sacred objects are kept, but also the most curious ones. There, they say, are the golden fans that were used to keep flies away from divine statues, the ivory hammers to break up solid incense, and, of course, ceremonial feathers. Some are rare, long and thin, from birds you have never seen. Others are short, decorated with colored linen threads and glass beads that shine in the sun. Upon entering, you smell resin, dry wood and bronze. An elderly priest, with half-closed eyes and slow movements, welcomes you with a gesture that seems more like a drawing in the air than a greeting. He leads you to a dark wooden chest, carved with symbols of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. It's fitting, you think, since each object inside seems to carry a fragment of the world's balance. The priest opens the chest with 2 turns of the key and reveals rows of feathers carefully arranged on raw linen. Some still have their original shine, others are dull with age. There are feathers from the Nile stork, the grey heron, and even a bluebird whose name you do not know. "Choose one," says the priest. "Today you clean the Hall of Words." You look up. The Hall of Words are. Few are allowed to enter there. It is where the oldest scribes recited formulas for the dead and the living, where papyrus was copied by hand, where poems were whispered before they were even written. They say the air inside is denser, as if each syllable spoken never really came out. It just floated up to the ceiling and remained there, suspended in time. You select a long, rust-colored feather with a dark tip. It vibrates slightly in your fingers, as if waking up. He walks silently to the hall. As you push the door open, you feel the coolness of the interior envelop you like a sheet washed by the wind. Light enters in thin beams through tall openings, revealing dust particles that rotate slowly, as if dancing to a music that only they can hear. The walls are lined with shelves. Hundreds of papyrus scrolls sleep in orderly repose. In the center of the room are stone tables with soft inscriptions, where copyists have sat for generations to write, correct, and dream. You approach the main table and run your quill slowly over its surface. The accumulated dust reveals the outlines of carved hieroglyphs, small, almost humble, an ankh, a palm, a symbol of silence. You continue your work, patiently following the curve of the stone. The feather not only blows away the dust, but also seems to calm the space. The air responds with less resistance. The light seems more stable. From time to time you find forgotten objects among the papyri. An ivory marker, a seal with a scribe's name erased by time, a shard of pottery where someone has rehearsed a repeated hieroglyph. You clean each one with the same delicacy with which you touch a memory. Historically, the Hall of Words, known by some scholars as the Hall of Maat, was both a library and a temple. It was where harmony was practiced between what was said and what was written. Many believed that a poorly copied word could misalign fate. Others believed that the dust on the papyri caused eye diseases in the scribes, and so cleaning them was almost a medical practice. Historians are still divided between those who see the hall as a functional place and those who treat it as a mystical space. But standing there with a pen in hand and the silence thicker than the air, you understand that perhaps it was both. At the end of the afternoon, you collect the remaining powder and place it all in a small ceramic vase, as if it were an offering. He puts the feather away in the same cloth he used to choose it, closes the door behind him, and goes out into the courtyard again. The world is more golden. And you lighter, because cleaning up old words is deep down like hearing secrets from someone who has already passed away, and respond with silence. The sun is already setting over the horizon, and the shadows on the ground form elongated patterns, as if the gods were playing at drawing stories with light and silence. You walk down the side corridor of the temple, feeling the accumulated heat of the day dissolve in a light wind coming from the east. The smell is different now, less dust, more jasmine. Someone has lit incense sticks near the main entrance. You come across a group of apprentices carrying jugs of water. They are wet, out of breath, laughing with a naturalness that only someone who has not yet heard the weight of responsibility can have. One of them drops a gourd, which rolls to your feet. You pick it up, hand it back, and receive a wide smile. As a reward, it's a simple moment, and like everything in ancient Egypt, full of hidden meanings. You now come to a chamber that few frequent, the room of lesser offerings. It is not the place where the great rituals are performed, but it is where the gifts of everyday life are kept. Flowers, pieces of bread, dried figs, small painted shells, and feathers. Many feathers. There, you understand. Feathers were not only used for cleaning or writing, they were left as symbols of lightness, of thought, of divine breath. You kneel before one of the shelves and notice a blue, almost violet feather stuck between two pieces of papyrus. Someone has placed it there, carefully, as if it were a word that could not be written, or a request that could not be voiced. You take the quill from the papers and it makes a soft sound like the touch of silk on stone. The guardian of the room enters silently and observes your gesture. "This came from a blind scribe," he says. "They say he didn't need to see the letters. He just needed to feel the rhythm of the air around him." You look at the feather again as if it now contains an entire story. "He said," continues the guardian, "that feathers don't just clean the dust. They clean the fear of making mistakes." This phrase stays with you, and it is with her that you leave, taking the feather to the altar in the chamber. There you place it among small wicker baskets and wilted figs. There is no ceremony, just a gesture, and yet everything seems sacred. Outside, night begins to dress the world in its cool cloak. The stars appear one by one, as if they were letters on the papyrus of the sky. You walk back to your room, your bare feet making a soft noise on the polished stones. On the way, he passes a group of musicians preparing for a performance in the courtyard. They tune fine-stringed harps, ceramic tambourines, and reed flutes. The sound is soft, like the prelude to a dream. You sit on a low bench, taking your time. Beside you, an old priest draws something in the sand with the tip of a stick. You lean in to see. It's a spiral, then another, then another. "What is this?" and you ask. He smiles with his eyes closed. "The shape the wind makes when it meets resistance. Sometimes it bends, sometimes it goes around, but it never stops." You watch, in silence. "And what does this have to do with feathers?" He raises the rod, points it to the sky. "Everything that is light learns from the wind." You stand there a little longer, watching the spirals slowly disappear as the wind rearranges the grains of sand, and think about all the feathers that passed through your hands that day. The ones that cleaned, the ones who wrote, those who kept silent, and those that will still teach you something. You stand up, feeling like there are more questions than answers now, but this perhaps is already a sign of wisdom. Night falls over Egypt like a velvet blanket, and you're back on the terrace where it all began. The desert breeze is cooler now, but not so much that it's uncomfortable. It's the kind of wind that just begs for silence, not blankets. Ahead of you, the Nile winds dark and shimmering, reflecting stars as if it wants to keep them all to itself. You rest your elbows on the stone wall and watch the final movements of the temple below. The last acolytes collect baskets, close doors, and extinguish lamps with ritualistic care. Each gesture seems part of a script that no one dares to alter. Beside you lies a small white feather. You don't know how it got there. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was left by someone like you, someone who also needed answers but found better questions. You hold it between your fingers. Light as a memory, fragile as a secret. In the central courtyard, a silent ritual begins. 3 hooded figures appear beneath the stone arch, carrying ceramic pots. From inside, they draw scented water which is thrown in circles on the ground, like a liquid offering to time itself. A flute begins to sound. Not a happy melody, not a sad one, just present. You take a deep breath. The air comes in clean, full of dust, yes, but also full of meaning. So remember the first questions of the day. How did the Egyptians clean the desert? How did they sweep away the unmovable? How did they organize chaos? The answer now seems obvious, with small gestures, with patience, with rituals that are less about results and more about presence. You close your eyes. He visualizes again the women, sweeping the market floor with long, thin feathers, the scribe drawing hieroglyphics with strokes as soft as the wind, the priest shaping invisible spirals in the sand, and the dove, yes, even the dove from the other script, deviating from the expected to follow the inexplicable. Historians still debate whether these feathers were actually sweeping away dust or whether the gesture was symbolic. But you, after everything you've seen, prefer to believe both at the same time, because sometimes cleaning the floor is also cleaning your mind, and a dustless temple is just a reflection of the desire for clarity inside the heads of those who live there. You open your eyes. Down below, the last acolyte closes the last gate. And the city enters that kind of silence that only ancient places know how to cultivate. A silence so dense that it seems to have texture. You get up. The white feather is still in his hand. You could take her with you, but he decides to leave her there, because deep down everything that is light belongs to the wind. And what was learned today no longer needs material proof. You walk slowly to your quarters. You pass through corridors that you now recognize without having to look. Every stone, every shadow, every smell is part of your sensory memory. An entire day dedicated to understanding. What on the surface seemed too simple to deserve attention. But now you know, nothing in ancient Egypt was simple. Everything, even a feather sweeping away dust, had the depth of an unwritten book. You lie down, breathe slowly. Let the sounds of the wind and leaves fill the void, and smile, because sometimes the most boring story is the one that makes you sleep the most soundly. Now that the last section has been told, and the sound of the Egyptian night is gently drifting in the background of your imagination, it is time to let it all rest. The halls are empty. The dust, which danced around the ancient world with a certain haughtiness, has finally settled. And you, who have walked through noisy markets, sacred temples and myrrh-scented halls, can also allow yourself this rest. Take a deep breath. Imagine lying on a soft mattress made of hand-woven linen, wrapped in light fabrics that sway in the desert breeze. The air is dry but not unpleasant. It smells of papyrus, jasmine, and a hint of warm sand that has drifted from far away, from the dunes that sleep eternally beyond the horizon. You hear a sound in the distance, perhaps the cooing of a dove or the whisper of an ancient song. The Egyptians, as you've seen, believed that even the simplest of gestures could carry greater meaning, and now this simple act of resting has become almost ceremonial. The dust has been swept away, the steps have been taken, the questions have been asked, and even those that haven't been answered. There's no need to rush. Let your thoughts float like feathers in the wind, with no fixed direction, just existing. And if any of them land on you, take it lightly. Because tonight, with history sleeping beside you, time stands still. There are no duties, no noises of the modern world, just you and the golden stillness of an enchanted desert. Close your eyes, let yourself go.